Okay, so anyway, this is just a quick little spiel about, you could call it ignorance. What's ignorance? What is this ignorance, or this sense of limitation, or this perceiving of reality the way it isn't, you could say? I mean, not to try to single anyone out, but for the sake of demonstration, I was just speaking to my girlfriend on the phone, who's very much a Christian, and from the perspective, which isn't a perspective really, of oneness, everything is seen as absolutely moot somehow. There's a seeing that all these paths and processes and ways of coming at the world and seeing God as this and that and the other, and perceiving ourselves as this way and not that way, and this is the truth and this isn't. All that sort of stuff is just seen as garbage in a sense. It's not garbage as in it's bad or it's wrong, but everything is blown away somehow as totally irrelevant in the absolute. So when oneness encounters itself appearing as a Christian, then that's fine because that's oneness. That's just the way it is. Oneness pretends to be a Christian. Oneness pretends to be a Buddhist or an Advaitist or a master or a disciple. So that's fine. What tends to happen though is the, the message of oneness, that there is only oneness, tends to filter in somehow, you could say. I mean, if I could do it, that would be a miracle, but, well, it's a miracle anyway. It would be impossible to say that I do it, right? As an entity. The miracle is that it happens. That this is happening is the miracle, obviously. So, a lot of people have questions about, well, how do I deal with people, right? How do I deal with my non my non-dual believer, or some of a spouse, or my family who doesn't like this, or the Christians, or all those Buddhists, or the people I used to know who aren't into this. And see, all of that's moot again, because in seeing what we are, it's seen that there's none of that separation and me defining myself as this non-dual type of person and the other person over there who's still an ignorant Christian. So I can explain the way it seems to be with my girlfriend. So there's a seeing that there's an ignorance about the nature of oneness, namely that there is something called me that's separate from something called God, and a necessity to maintain a relationship with God, and that sort of thing. But see, that's oneness. That whole play is just oneness happening. So all those ignorant people out there aren't that. They are the oneness, too. Too. They are the oneness too. Yeah, there we go. Everything's oneness. So those ignorant so-called seekers, or the Christians that really should be non-dualists, are oneness happening. Having said that, there can also be a communication as oneness to oneness, sort of saying, hey, look at this, maybe. So someone says, the Bible is it. It's like, okay, well, the Bible is it because it is also oneness. But it's sort of that movement, you could say, towards a more inclusive seeing, for lack of a better description. So the seeing of oneness is obviously all inclusive, whereas these paths, Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, they're exclusive in a sense, right? Because to be a Christian, I can't also be a Muslim. In the same way, to be a non-dualist, I can't also be any of the other ones. But see, reality isn't like that. Reality doesn't divide itself. And see, that's the solution to our bereftness, to our feeling of loss and limitation. Because if we're excluding something, we're going to feel the sense of, I'm missing something, I'm lacking something, something isn't quite right, something's a little off, I'm not quite with it. I'm not in reality, or I'm separate from something, or God's over here and I'm here and I'm trying to relate. It's psychosis, really. I mean, that's what happened for me. There's an awakening, and then a mental interpretation, which essentially was a bunch of thoughts about the nature of reality. So rather than abiding as reality, there was a moving apparently into this mental construct called Me in My New View of the World, which was completely off the mark and created resistance because I was trying to overlay this sense of reality with um, the way things are. So it's my version of it, right? It's my version of this truth carrying around in my head and then projecting it ad nauseum on the raw isness of being. So what we're really pointing to is that raw potentiality of is, which we can just see right now as what's happening. The substratum, the basis of what's happening is here. But it's very impersonal, you see. That's why Christians, they generally hang on to this anthropomorphized version of God floating around in the heavens. You see, it gets very, very easy to see through language and all these conceptual complexities when it's seen that there isn't anything separate anywhere. Because the whole nature of what we've been trying to do is divide up reality and then try to somehow unify everything from that standpoint of reality being divided, so it's impossible. We've already moved into an impossible task of trying to pretend to be a separate entity and then find wholeness from an inherently separate standpoint, you could say. An imaginary separate standpoint, but so that's why we always reorient back to the fact that this is always whole. There's only ever wholeness. And so there's no way to even sort of entertain these notions seriously anymore. So, how do I find God, right? It's like I'm on this quest for God or enlightenment. But no, I mean, if someone says that, that's really just oneness pretending again, right? Oh, it's just oneness pretending. Big deal. There's a lot of oneness pretending, you could say. Most onenesses you meet, well, onenesses. Most people you meet are oneness pretending to be people, rather than oneness being oneness. Enlightenment is simply oneness recognizing oneness. And how special can that be? Where's that special intermediary in that? There's just the oneness. It's really a miracle to try to be separate and actually pull it off and believe it. That's more enlightenment than oneness. Oneness is simple, it's unembellished. But to be an ego that believes it's separate, that's astounding. I mean, that's the biggest miracle of all, really. Inherent non-separation that can actually convince itself that it is a separate entity that could die and that is living a separate life. There's the miracle in a nutshell. So ignorance isn't to be condemned. Who would condemn it, really, of course? But also, where's this ignorant person? How could if there aren't any people as separate entities, then who's to blame for the ignorance, right? So we can't have a non-dual crusade because there aren't any enemies. Jesus said, love your enemies, right? There aren't really any enemies to love. There is just love, in which, the idea of enemies or friends or Hitler or Ramana can happen. So it gets very simple here, doesn't it? Rhetorical. Because all the questions are rhetorical. None of our questions beg an answer, really. Every question that we have is essentially, why am I still a seeker? Why am I still me? And why can't I find this wholeness? Anyway, that's enough out of this guy. Yeah, and I apologize for the videos. I'm kind of on a ghetto computer here, and I'm in a little shabby dorm room. What kind of guru lives in a messy dormitory in Oshawa? I mean, I'm glad. That destroys the guru game right there. If I were a guru, I'd be in a freaking Taj Mahal or something. But anyway, thanks for listening. You are that, and so is the cat, or something. I'm crazy.